The Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Alexander Syrskyi, has, for the first time, given a detailed account of one of Ukraine's boldest military operations, the offensive in Russia's Kursk region. According to him, this was an extraordinary decision. The main goal was to force Russia to switch to defense on its own territory. Syrskyi said that this had a significant moral effect, boosting the fighting spirit of both the Ukrainian army and its citizens. Also, during the operation in the Kursk region, at least 80,000 Russian soldiers were killed or wounded. With an extremely limited circle of commanders, we developed a plan to distract Russian troops by entering the Kursk region and, for the first time, forcing the invaders into a defensive position within their own country. It was a risky gamble, but in the end, our forces captured about 800 square kilometers of territory. Alexander Syrskyi, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, in an interview with The Washington Post. Special Forces soldiers from the main intelligence directorate Shaman Battalion eliminated a Russian assault group during a frontline combat operation and captured 4 enemy soldiers. The intelligence officers also released a video of the battle and the clearing of positions. The footage shows an intense firefight with Russian assault troops. Meanwhile, in the Kupiansk direction, the enemy tried to advance toward Ukrainian positions in the areas of Stepova-Novoselivka, Zarazov, and Novoplatnivka. In the Lyman sector, the defense forces repelled an offensive action by the Russian army near Vrykivka, Selenia High, Granivka, and Shipalivka. And in the Pokrovsk direction, clashes took place near the settlements of Myrolabivka, Lisivka, Myrnorad, Alexievka, and Vladimirovka.
They conscripted for compulsory service starting at 18, who will be replaced by more experienced servicemen, and those, in turn, will be sent to the front. They are gathering, one way or another, personnel. The training will be completed by the end of July, and so during this period, late July and early August, the start of the second phase is expected, with the possible use of these forces, the reserves they have gathered, both in terms of personnel and armored equipment. That's why we, our intelligence assets, various forces, and allies need to clearly determine the real situation that is actually developing with their reserves, and prepare our own forces to counter them.
Ukrainian scouts managed to destroy a number of Russian vehicles on one of the eastern fronts. The footage of the combat operation was published by the soldiers of the 28th Brigade named after the Knights of the Winter Campaign, and they noted that for a long time it couldn't be shown because the scouts were operating behind enemy lines. The soldiers noted that thanks to the successful operation and coordinated actions, they managed to destroy a self-propelled artillery unit, a howitzer, and 3 armored fighting vehicles carrying Russian infantry.
As for armored vehicles lately, well, over the past month or two, the enemy hasn't been using them intensively because our drone operators in this so-called death zone, about 20 kilometers on both sides of the line of contact, have been countering any attempts to use this equipment, which happen about 15 to 20 times. They, ended up with their armored vehicles being burned, basically destroyed. That's why, lately they've been operating in small groups.
The armed forces of Ukraine have shown unique footage of an injured soldier being evacuated to the rear with the help of a wheeled drone. The ground robotic system made it possible to get the soldier out as quickly as possible and with minimal risk to his comrades from the 5th Assault Kiev Brigade. At the same time, over the past day, Ukraine's defense forces have eliminated 970 Russian soldiers. In total, since the start of the full-scale invasion, the Russian army has lost more than 1,045,000 soldiers. Also, the day before, Ukrainian defenders destroyed 3 Russian tanks, 2 armored combat vehicles, 42 artillery systems, as well as 88 units of the occupiers' automotive equipment.
Nikolai Malamaz, general of the Ukrainian army, former head of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine. Nikolai Grigorievich, good morning. Glory to Ukraine. Hello.
Greetings. Glory to the heroes.
Nikolai Grigorievich, let's start, of course, with the hottest front, Pokrovsk. We can see that earlier we talked about how the Russians would try to bypass Pokrovsk and encircle it. And they haven't really abandoned that tactic. But now they're already penetrating into Pokrovsk itself. We've already seen more than 1 Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group in Pokrovsk. Of course, our soldiers heroically drive them out. But nevertheless, what is the current situation on the Pokrovsk front? And if Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups are already penetrating into the city itself, how bad of a sign is that?
Well, first of all, it's important to note that the enemy has strategically designated the Pokrovsk direction as the main one. We remember that Russia planned to launch its summer offensive in 8 main sectors, from Sumy to Zaporizhia and Kherson. The first stage of the offensive failed. That was in June, at the beginning of July. That's why the focus today is on 3 strategic directions: Sumy, Lyman, and Pokrovsk. Well, in addition, of course, from the south there's Novocherkassk. There are also heavy battles in other sectors, but it's Pokrovsk that is decisive. Putin personally set the task to capture Pokrovsk in the coming weeks. That's why, in this sector, in this operation, there were about 120,000 enemy troops from various branches and types of forces. Of course, that's equipment, aviation, and drones. All of it has been thrown in there, and the tactics have been worked out. Pretty much the same as before, like when they stormed Avdiivka, coming in, as we said, from the flanks and from the rear. And right now, for 4 days in a row, fighting has been going on in the southwest of Pokrovsk. They're using the tactic of pushing through with small groups, and not just with regular equipment, but also with armored vehicles and sabotage groups. And right now, there's a shift in tactics, especially as they get closer to the city. These are Special Forces sabotage groups. These are professionals, not those mobilized guys who are recruited and storm in stages at different points, trying to gain a foothold. They enter different sectors specifically, distracting our attention with firepower and drone strikes. And accordingly, attacks are launched on a specific, literally, region or a particular street. For example, Heroa Street in Pokrovsk, they went in and basically staked their claim. And now they're trying to establish positions there with other, more, let's say, regular units. And not just special forces, but also with rifle units. We've worked out this whole tactic now and pushed them out of that sector, but they've holed up in some spots, either in small groups or alone. We spent 3 days clearing them out, searching for them, of course, neutralizing their positions. But the enemy keeps repeating this. They keep trying to break through, get in, and dig in. In the same way, on the other side, up north, they're using the same approach, just farther out. Not in the city or on the outskirts yet, but they're also coming in from that direction, trying to create a sort of pocket, a semi-encirclement, to completely cut us off from both roads. First and foremost, that's the Pokrovsk, Koshchetanika Road, and the second route is Pokrovsk, Pavlorad, which are used to deliver weapons, equipment, and, accordingly, reinforcements to our side. It constantly targets these 2 supply routes with drones, artillery, and rocket systems. This, of course, makes the situation more difficult. We're simply under fire, either delivering ammunition to the soldiers or evacuating the wounded. That's how it is. And now, even more so, we see that the enemy has significantly increased drone attacks. It's like the same model he used before, the sums he applied when destroying logistics. Now he's using it on the Pokrovsk direction as well. We're counteracting. On one hand, we're already striking from the flanks. We also have our own counterattacks in this same sector. We're advancing 300 to 400 meters, striking these groups that are in the rear. But now it's with drones, long-range artillery, rocket systems, and aviation. This is the destruction of reserves that are being brought up for such operational attacks. And of course, we're now creating a defensive setup, both anti-air missile and artillery, against the rocket systems that are targeting our logistics. And of course, regarding drones as well. That means anti-drone systems, anti-aircraft guns, aviation, and also electronic systems. Where there are no fiber optic connections, all those aviation models. We are, of course, destroying them together. Radio electronics, detection, and of course, strikes with firepower. In other words, we are freeing up logistics from such systematic strikes. That's why, in this situation, I think that by working out models of counterattacks, rear strikes, and strikes on the enemy's rear, even under tough, difficult conditions, and by partially neutralizing their ability to block our logistics routes, we are holding our positions and not allowing the enemy to advance. And most importantly, in this sector, our command, as we've said many times before, carries out counterattacks on a more strategic level, striking where the enemy doesn't expect it, where they've already pushed deep into our defenses, for example, and we come in from the right or from the rear. This is a very important approach. I think the situation will change soon. There are some issues, especially with personnel in certain brigades on our side. Right now, we're reinforcing these positions, and accordingly, both meetings and the President's staff briefings have shown that there's now a clear understanding that this sector is decisive. It's necessary to strengthen our positions by bringing in more experienced units and, of course, additional reserves coming in from the rear. That's it. I think we're holding this position, especially since we're not allowing the enemy to close a wider encirclement in the Novocherkassk direction. We can see that we're already holding the line, not letting them advance further, even though they're trying to push forward in Shevchenkov and, as we see, towards Nyporad. But in these settlements, we're creating very strong pockets of resistance and strike groups, which are hitting the enemy units as soon as they arrive at the front. This is a very important aspect, not to hunt them along the front or fight them in the city, but to strike them about 10 to 15 kilometers out when they're just approaching the frontline zones. Well, if we're talking about other directions, of course, they're trying to resume attacks in the Sumy direction. Right now, their objective there is to push further into our defenses, so to speak. We carried out counterattacks, pushed the enemy back ourselves, and liberated territories. Now they're trying again to break through, destroying our logistics. The fighting is heavy, but we're holding our position. What's important is that we're holding the Kursk direction. The enemy has long been focused on pushing our forces out of this area. But no matter how many objectives Putin and the Russian command set, we're holding advantageous positions and inflicting heavy losses on the enemy. Of course, the enemy's attempt to create buffer zones in Sumy and Kharkiv regions has failed. And in Kharkiv, even in the midst of heavy fighting, we're conducting counter-operations and holding the front, especially in the Belgorod direction. This is a constant threat hanging over Russian territories. We're holding the Lyman direction because they're trying to concentrate their forces there from above and launch attacks, specifically in the Kharkiv and Luhansk sectors, to distract our forces and weaken our defensive positions in the Pokrovsk direction. But we're not letting them do that. Every day there are big, heavy battles and counterattacks. We're constantly repelling them, counterattacking ourselves, and in some sectors we're already advancing from the flanks, forcing the enemy to fall back. Well, things are calmer in the south. There was active fighting in the Zaporizhzhia sector. More than once last week, they were tasked with advancing in Tokmachka, in Robotyne, basically across the whole sector, even if it was just to capture a few positions. Putin gave the order to show progress every day, especially before the negotiation process, to capture new villages, and at the very least to make some tactical gains in some sector. They weren't able to achieve anything anywhere during this time, so during the negotiations there was no talk that we, that is, Russia, had any major successes and would dictate terms from a position of military strength based on some kind of victories. They showed that we are destroying them. Strategically, the summer offensive operation failed. Right now, in addition to Pokrovsk, other sectors are being prepared as well. Russia is building up its strength and will attempt to advance in another 5 or 6 sectors, but this time using new, smaller battalion units, though there will be quite a lot of them. We will have to work hard on the battlefield.
We don't have much time left, but still, yes, you already partially mentioned that the occupiers' activity is also connected to the processes that took place yesterday in Istanbul. Those were consultations between the Ukrainian and Russian delegations. We saw that just the day before, yes, the occupiers' activity in the Pokrovsk direction was literally twice as high. Yesterday, the General Staff reported more than 70 assaults. Today, over the past day, they are talking about 36. What does this mean? Can we already state that there is some decrease in activity, or is it still too early to say that?
Well, here,
I just want to warn you that we don't have much time left. Briefly,
first of all, it depends on how many forces and resources the enemy has. We repelled them, destroyed them, and I especially noted that we have now struck at the reserves moving toward the front, destroyed new units that are arriving, and we've done this with systematic missile strikes, drones, and other means. This is already a weakening of their retreat. They pull back, reduce the number of attacks, then push forward again, and so on. But the idea was to increase, right before the negotiations, by at least 70-something. So it was a peak situation. Throw in the air defense forces and send them into attacks. For now, they're advancing and capturing some ground, and they're about to take Pokrovsk. That's why at the negotiations it was, surrender, we'll set the terms. It didn't work out, so now they're pulling back. They just don't have the strength or resources to keep advancing like that. And besides, the negotiation process is over now. I think there's a certain tandem at play, but everything depends on the number of reserves and troops they can deploy, because the Pokrovsk direction is constantly under the control of the Russian leadership in terms of capturing this sector and advancing toward Kramatorsk, Kostyantynivka, and Sloviansk. That's the #1 objective. They haven't solved this task, and they won't solve it.
Nikolai Grigorievich, thank you very much. Nikolai Malamaz, General of the Ukrainian Army and former head of the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service, was with us on the line. Breaking news, exclusive videos from the front line.
In-depth analytical reviews, and only the most authoritative speakers.
Subscribe to the Freedom YouTube channel so you don't miss the most important updates.